All right, today we're going to take a look at Hellenistic culture. Hellenistic culture. Yes?
I have a question about the PowerPoints. If we email you to send those to us, will you send them back to us so we can study for the test?
They're all online.
Oh, they are?
Yeah, you can look at them online on MyFire. All the PowerPoints I've done here in class and I did in the other class, they're all there. So just go each week by week, you'll see them, just click on them, there they are. Okay? All right, so we want to look at Hellenistic culture. Hellenistic, the word Hellenistic, which I mentioned when I did the last presentation, which you weren't there for, so I'll just say Hellenistic comes from the word Hellas. Hellas is the word for Greek or Greece. Greek people, ancient Greek people, did not call themselves Greek. They didn't call their land Greece. They called it Hellas. And so Hellenistic then is a sort of modern word. It's a word that has come about in modern times to describe the later Greek period. So roughly it begins, as you see here, around 350, some people might say 375 BC, down to at least 133 BC. Some people would take it on down to about 50 BC. Okay? So it's until the Romans take over. And that's different in different places. In mainland Greece, that's around 133. If you get out to, say, Egypt or someplace, Ptolemaic Empire, then that's closer to the time of Julius Caesar, 48 BC. Okay? So what I want to talk about for the next few minutes here is culture. The history part I've already covered. That's online. You can listen to that. Okay? But this, I want to just look at the culture. Now, one of the things we see during the Hellenistic period is the rise of powerful kingdoms and very powerful city-states. And so there is the Seleucid kingdom, there is the Ptolemaic kingdom, there is the Antigonid kingdom, there are the city-states of Pergamum, for example, and Rhodes, the island of Rhodes. These become very powerful, wealthy city-states. Now, eventually, these city-states will decline. The city-state idea of ancient Greece, and we see kingdoms. Kingdoms become the main thing during the Hellenistic period. Large kingdoms, and this is a time. This period is a time of great wealth and growth in these cities, and so that means then you got a lot of culture. It's hard to have a lot of culture when you're just trying to survive. See what I'm saying? If you're worried about just eating food or keeping yourself safe, you're probably not out there painting too many pictures, right? Does that make sense? You're probably not writing too many poems. Well, maybe you're writing some, but I mean, it's tough because you're just trying to survive. But when times are going well, people have the time, they have the interest, they have the energy to devote themselves more to creative things. So that's what we see in this period. We see a lot of literature. Now, one of the things, we talked about before with the classical Greeks, that they had tragedy and comedy. Remember we covered that briefly. There is a new kind of comedy now that comes about in the Hellenistic period. It's still Greek comedy, but it's a sort of a twist. The twist of this should be very familiar to us because you find it a lot in American television, especially. Maybe movies too. The comedy is mistaken identity. Mistaken identity. In other words, one person thinks the other person is somebody they're not. And so that creates a humorous situation, okay? And we even call them situation comedies, right? Sitcoms. That's what they call the comedies on television. Many of them are sitcoms. That's short for situation comedy. And it's the situations that people find themselves in that become humorous. We did not invent that. The ancient Greeks had that in the Hellenistic period. Stock characters and mistaken identity. For example, they would have a comedy where there would be a household, okay, a family dwelling, right? In it, there would be a sort of a really rich guy who owned the house. It was sort of the father of the family. There would be the wife. There would be a daughter, maybe a son. There probably would be, maybe the wife's father lives there. Does any of this sound familiar? It should sound familiar. There's a lot of TV comedies are like this. And then you've got a servant. In the case of ancient Greece, it's a slave. The servant is the smartest guy in the room, right? He knows everything that's going on. Yet, he's in this position, he's in this situation where he doesn't have any power. He doesn't have the power, but he's got all the knowledge. And so the story is often told from the point of view of the slave or the servant. So you think about a lot of TV shows like that, right? How about Benson? You ever watch? That's an old show, Benson, where the guy was the butler to like the guy that was the governor, the nanny. You ever hear of the nanny? She's like the servant, you know. And there's lots more. I don't know. I don't keep up on all of them. But a lot of these TV shows where somebody is sort of in a lower position is really the smartest person and I know everything that's going on. And a person that's at the top is kind of doesn't know what's going on. I won't say they're stupid, but they're unaware. And the other stock character would be, for example, usually the father has a daughter, and the daughter is doing all kinds of stuff the father doesn't want her to do, but the father has no idea. So when the father's around, she's like, oh, yes, Daddy, whatever you like. Oh, wonderful. And then as soon as he leaves, boom, she's out doing whatever she's going to do, right? So, okay. And then the guy who's the grandfather is grumpy. He's a grumpy old man, and he's always complaining about everything. Okay? Oh, so we see this kind of thing. Oh, look. What's the show I've watched? What's it called? The Goldbergs. Everybody see that show? Nobody sees that show. Okay. Goldbergs is a TV show. It's out right now. And they've got like the grandfather's always in the show, and he's always kind of grumpy about things and stuff. You know, anyway, so that's the way it is. Now, that kind of thing gets used a lot. Another new thing in the culture or literature aspect that we really need to mention that probably be of importance to several of you here is the development of the language of Greek called Koine. Koine Greek. And if you've studied biblical studies, right, if you're taking, I know you got to take some Bible classes, if you're taking a New Testament class, the Greek that they're talking about when they say this is in Greek or Greek this, Greek that, it's all Koine Greek. It's not classical Greek. It's not Homeric Greek. It's Koine. Koine means common. Common. So it's a little different than classical. The grammar's not quite as precise. So forth. We're not going to get into it. But basically, the other thing that happened since Alexander the Great conquered most of the eastern part of the Mediterranean and on into Persia, the Greek language then spreads all over the eastern Mediterranean and into the Middle East even, where Greek becomes the language of business, the language of, sort of learning, literature, that kind of thing. People still have their local languages, but they're using this. Think about it today. Today, for example, English is sort of the main language around the world. I'm not saying everybody speaks English, but most people want to learn English, right? Why? The other reason is, for example, if you're dealing with computers, all the stuff's in English. If you're programming a computer, a lot of the commands are all in English. They're not in, Arabic or some other Chinese or something. They're all in English because it was developed here. We developed it in English. So, and also in business. If you want to go into business, most of it's, I'm not saying everything, but a lot of stuff is conducted in English. Business, technology, science, even entertainment. You want to watch movies? We make a whole lot of movies here. Video games, all that, music videos, all that stuff, it's all in English. So there's a real push to learn English. Just the individual kind of wants to know it just so they know what's going on. That's the way it was with Greek. I'm not saying everybody spoke Greek, but everybody knew about it, and a lot of people wanted to learn it or they knew some of it. Okay, because it became the main language in the eastern part of the Mediterranean, even in the Roman period. This is why, for example, when the New Testament comes about, it's not written in Latin. The Romans are in charge. Their language is Latin. Why is it written in Greek? It's because of Alexander the Great. It's because of Koine Greek. And, for example, just to let you know how powerful the Greek language was, the Old Testament, which I abbreviate OT, just because I don't like to write a lot of words, like a lot of letters. Right? So that's my abbreviation. So if you see OT with me, you won't see it that often in this class. It's Old Testament. So the Old Testament then, or the Hebrew Bible, gets translated into Greek. Why? Because the Jewish people, many of them could not read Hebrew, but they could read Greek. See, even the Jews, with their tight-knit thing and their religion and their community, still, for example, in Egypt at Alexandria, which I told you Alexander the Great starts the city of Alexandria, the Jewish leaders come together and they say, you know what the problem is that our people here cannot read the scriptures. They don't know Hebrew. They do know Greek. So they sit down with a committee of 70 editors, 70 scholars who translate the Old Testament into Greek. That's called the Septuagint. The Septuagint is a translation of the Old Testament, the Hebrew part of the Bible, into Greek in the 2nd century BC. Okay? Why? Because it was needed. The people needed to learn it. And it's often abbreviated, you see on the screen there, LXX. Why? What's LXX stand for? 70, yeah, it's a Roman numeral. If you don't know the Roman numerals, the Super Bowl's coming up, you got to learn the Roman numerals. What's the one this year? What is it? 51? LI? I think it's 51 this year. All right, LI. L is 50, I is 1. So anyway, you got to learn that. For nothing else for the Super Bowl, learn those numbers. Go back and review the history of the Super Bowl, and you'll learn your Roman numerals up to 51. Well, this is LXX. L is 50, X is 10. So 50, 10, 10 makes 70. Okay? So that 70 stands for the 70 scholars, 70 editors, 70 people in the committee who translate or have translated the Old Testament into Greek. All right, just to show you the power of the Greek language and culture, it's even taking a culture like the Jewish culture, which, is very, they kind of keep to themselves, but they recognize we got to do this in Greek or people just aren't going to read it. Now, for us who study the Bible, biblical studies, having that translation is very interesting because every translation is also an interpretation. It really is. So, we can get the way people were thinking about the Old Testament in about 150 BC. This is what the Jews, how they interpreted or what they thought about the Old Testament text because this is the way they translated it into Greek. So anyway, it gives us another way to look at the Old Testament text. You can look at it in Hebrew, you can also look at it in Greek, and you can see what words they choose in Greek to translate this Hebrew word. And what does that say about it? So that's a whole other study which we're not even going to get into here. But just be aware of it. The Septuagint comes from this time period. What else? Art. Here you see the Venus de Milo. Very famous statue, one of the most famous statues of this period. If you want to see it, you got to go to Paris today. You got to go to the Louvre. And you can see it. You'll notice it because there'll be a whole group of people gathered around it taking pictures of it. So that anytime you're walking through a museum and you see a whole group of people gather around taking pictures of something, you might want to stop and take a look. Probably it's something interesting or important, or at least people think it's important, so you ought to at least, while you're there, take a look at it, right? Now, like I told you, this is a time of great prosperity, which means people have the time to concentrate on things like art, sculptures, paintings, poetry, drama, all that kind of stuff. Where if a guy is chasing you, right, if the zombies are coming at you, you're probably not painting too many pictures, right? When the zombies come, we know the zombies are coming, right? I only hope when the zombies come, they're the slow ones. Because if those fast ones come after me, man, I'm out of here. I'm gone. I'm gone right away. I can't outrun those guys. You ever seen those guys? See that movie? I saw that movie. Those things are just like, they're like going like 50 miles an hour. I can't outrun that. And there's thousands of them. Now the slow ones, I might have a chance. I could last a few days at least. Anyway, if the zombies are chasing me, I'm probably not stopping to paint a nice picture. Oh, that's a nice tree over there. I'm going to paint it. Zombies get me, right? So you got to have time to reflect that you're not starving, that somebody's not chasing you, trying to kill you. It's hard to do some of this artistic stuff, like chisel a marble sculpture while, people are trying to kill you. You're probably not going to stop to do that. I'm not saying you couldn't. You don't have the ability. You might well have. You might be a great artist, but you're not going to have the opportunities, right? Of time, because a lot of times artists don't make any money. I hate to tell people that because they think artists all are very wealthy. That's not always. That's normally not the case. Actually, artists are often not paid anything, and are usually not recognized till they're dead. So it doesn't do you much good while you're alive. So that means you got to have at least enough money or some way to eat, some place to sleep, and it gives you the time. I mean, if you're always working a job 12 hours a day, you don't have a lot of time to sit around and do these other artistic things. Yeah.
I just thought of something I've always wondered. Like the statue,
Sure.
it doesn't have arms on it. Is that because they sculpted it like that?
No arms.
All
No, they had arms. What you'll find is many statues like this will not have a head, and they will not have the arms. Sometimes they're missing a leg. I actually found a marble statue. I excavated it and found a life-size, actually a little bigger than life-size, of Artemis, the Greek goddess Artemis, in Jordan. Come down digging, and like, whoo, here's her shoulder, here's her head, is gone. Her head was gone. I got the neck. Why? Oftentimes, the arms and the head was attached later. So sometimes they're attached because it's hard to sculpt them as a part of the rest of it, the weight of it. Other times, even if it is attached, when something happens to the statue and it falls over, those are the first things that break. So if it's just like, I don't know, something you might have in your house, if it's tall and fragile and it falls over, it's going to hit towards the top or on the side, and that's where the arms and the head are. Yeah.
I was telling you, I went to Home Museum in Greece.
Yes.
All like that. I was told it was because it was from like the enemy, like to show that they weren't valued or whatever, like to diminish.
This is another way. It could be defaced, literally defaced, right? Take the head off. Yes, that happens. Sometimes it happens by just removing the part. Sometimes they actually carve graffiti on it. I've seen, for example, a statue like this where on the forehead somebody's chiseled a cross. They chiseled a cross because they say, well, this is a pagan god, so I'm going to put a cross on it. But yeah, other times they might knock it. They deliberately destroy it. So they knock it over, or maybe they hit it and they break the stuff off. Like this statue that I found of Artemis, she was missing her arms. She had one leg that was broken, and her head was gone. Yeah.
So why is Venus
Venus is not in Venice. No, I don't mean Venice. It's Venus.
I'm just reading it in French.
Venus.
Why is it famous though? Like, why is it?
Why is it famous? Oh, well, now that's a whole nother. You got to take an art class. I'll tell you about that. Well, by Venus, what I mean here is the goddess Venus, which is the Roman name, right, for the goddess of love, right? So, anyway, yeah. Anyway, and De Milo, I think it really means of Milan. Originally, they found it there, but yeah. And why is it famous? That's a harder one. It's famous because people believe the form of it, the carving of it, is unique and is very detailed and well done. So that's probably it. It's probably also that way, because it like a lot of things, it becomes famous. Why is the Mona Lisa painting so famous? Well, I don't know. It is. Why is Kim Kardashian famous? Well, she is. Some people are famous for being famous. Okay? So why is this particular person famous or this particular piece of art famous? Sometimes it just catches on and as people talk about it.
Okay.
Venus de Milo's in some songs that people sang. They talk about Venus de Milo, Venus, all that kind of thing. So it became in the popular culture, and then when people go to a museum, many times when they go to a museum, there are, like maybe 10, 15, 20 things in this museum everybody wants to see. This is one of them.
Yeah, because I've been to Paris, but I haven't been to the museum,
Oh,
So I was asking you, like,
you should go.
usually, like, if it's in Paris and it has some type of importance, why is it there? Because now we should know it from there.
Sure.
So I was asking why.
Well, yeah, because, well, you know, a museum like the Louvre or the British Museum or the big museum in Berlin, they have had empire and they've had influence around the world. So they collect the best things from around the world. So that's part of the reason it's famous is you already know stuff in this museum, you expect it to be special because somebody has collected it from Greece or wherever and hauled it all the way to Paris. Well, anyway, we have to move on. Good questions, though. Religion is syncretism, syncretistic. Syncretism is a word, well, my mother used to call a $10 word, that basically just means blending together. For example, in ancient Egypt, they had a lot of Egyptian culture, but when the Greeks get there, they bring their Greek culture. When they mix it together, we now have a sort of hybrid of Greek and Egyptian culture. And especially when we talk about that in the form of religion, it's syncretism or syncretistic or syncretistic religion. What that means is they would take, say, an Egyptian god and give it and merge it sort of with a Greek god. It would keep some of its Egyptian qualities and it'd have some of its Greek qualities, but we'd say these are really the same god. Okay, so they did that, for example, with a god called Serapis, who is a male god. They said, well, he's really a lot like Jupiter, so we're going to call him Serapis Jupiter, or Serapis Zeus in the Greek form, Zeus, right? And so, you know, that's what they do. So they would take, this is the storm god, this is the weather god. Well, he's, you know, it's like, this is sort of the special god of thunder and light. Oh, we're going to put that with our special god like that. And so they would mix them together. It's a real mixing and blending of religion, especially. Now, the other thing we need to remember is that education comes in the gymnasium. Now, you know, for us, I don't know what you think of when you think of the gymnasium. You may not think of education. You probably think of athletics, right? Right? So, gymnasium is a Greek word. You remember, I told you what it comes from. You remember what it comes from? From the word gymnos. The word gymnos in Greek means, as we would say back in Kentucky, naked. Yeah, or as my mother would say, in your birthday suit. That's the way my mother put it. She used to have a lot of sayings, but you know, she'd say that person's running around in their birthday suit. That means they're running around in the clothes they were born with, which is none. So the Greeks would compete. They would exercise in the a natural state of their birth, right? Without clothing. And so therefore the gymnasium is the naked area. It's the place where people are exercising in the nude. Now, also besides exercise was a part of education. Okay? So the gymnasium then becomes to be called the place where you not only exercise, but you also are exercising the brain. The brain should be your toughest muscle, by the way, and if it isn't, start working on it. Okay? The brain is like a muscle. If you don't use it, it's just like, you know, if I go out and I try to bench press 500 pounds, it's not going to work. Right? Probably ever for me. But if I start with a little bit and I keep doing it every day, I'll get better. Why? I'll be exercising my muscles. It's the same way with your brain. If you only use your brain and just go out there and say, hey, I'm going to take this test and I'm not going to study, your brain's going to get strained. It's not going to work too well. So you have to work it just like a guy lifting weights lifts, you know, regularly and often. You got to do the same with your brain. You got to exercise it, I would hope, every day. Right? On whatever it is you're studying, then your brain will get stronger like a muscle. And so when you approach things, it'll come to you much easier. You'll grasp it faster. You'll say, yeah, this is another. So this is, you know, anyway. For the Greeks, education and athletics were not separated. They were together. They were all competitive as well. All right? All right. Good enough. By the way, in Europe today, the word gymnasium does mean sort of like what we would call high school. Many of them call it gymnasium. I went to gymnasium, which they mean they went to sort of like what we would call high school here in the United States. It's a common word, more common word, especially in Germany. But it's picked up from the ancient language. Anyway, let's move on. How about philosophy? Okay, you see this guy? He's thinking. He got a little question mark over his head, scratching his head. He's thinking about philosophy. I want to describe to you in the next few screens some of the most common philosophies, just in a nutshell. Obviously, we can't get into. You could spend a whole semester on Greek philosophy easily. There were skeptics. This is a school of philosophy. We use the word skeptic or skeptical, something like that. But the word skeptic is a philosophy, and it comes from the Greek word to observe carefully. That's really the word skeptic comes from. Skeptos. It comes from the word that means to look around, to observe carefully. And what it comes to mean for us is disbelief. In other words, if you tell me, for example, that when you get time to take this third quiz, and you say, I didn't know I was supposed to take that quiz, or my computer shut down on me, or whatever. You start to give me a lot of lines about stuff. I might well be skeptical. I've heard a lot of things. People, there was one woman took my class several years ago, not here, who missed every test. I just knew if I was having a test, she wasn't going to be there. And I just waited for the message to come to me. She wasn't going to be there. One time she told me she couldn't come because she was afraid to cross bridges. And she lived on the other side of a bridge. And I mentioned, well, you seem to come other days. But why the test days? And of course, that was in North Carolina, and near the coast, there were a lot of bridges. I said, well, maybe you need to relocate to a different part of the country where there aren't so many big bridges. Anyway, sometimes we're skeptical. That means, I don't know if I really, if you're telling me a story or not, see? But it actually comes to mean in this philosophy that you not only just doubt maybe one statement, you doubt everything. You doubt everything. You're skeptical of knowledge. This school was founded by a guy named Pyrrhon. There's his dates, 365 to 275. Pyrrhon and the skeptical school of philosophy, skeptics, as they're called. Pyrrhon. All right? And by the way, this Hellenistic philosophy is very popular with the Romans. The Romans, and we're getting ready to talk about the Romans later today if we have enough time. We'll get started on it. Certainly next week, your book, your reading stuff is on the Romans. The Romans will end up conquering the Greeks militarily, but culturally, the Greeks conquered the Romans. I mean, the Romans just borrow Greek mythology, they borrow Greek philosophy. They take hold of it. They slightly change a few of the names, but I mean, it's there. And the Romans loved this later Greek philosophy a lot more than they did the earlier stuff. Then there's the Cynics. How about the Cynics? What does cynic mean? Cynic is a Greek word that means dog-like. Dog-like. Why do they call these philosophers dog-like philosophers? Because these people did in public what other people did in private. Like a dog. A dog has no shame. Right? I got 2 little dogs. I like my little dogs. But I mean, my dogs have to go outside to do what I call their business. I'll just let you imagine what that is. I call it their business. I say, let's go do your business. And they go outside and they do. And they have no shame. People come walking by, cars go by, they don't care. Right? Dogs also do other things in full view of other people, which I won't go into. They have no shame. Right? These philosophers were dog-like. They did things that most people would do in private. They would do it in public with no shame. Okay? That's how they got that name. So I won't describe it any further than that. I'm sure you have vivid imaginations. You can think of, I got a question. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
My question is, wasn't there like any laws or any rules that would prevent them from doing that? Because, like, I mean,
Well, there was social custom. Yeah, it was not to be done, but they did it anyway. They didn't care.
they didn't get arrested or put in jail.
Yeah, I don't. Well, okay. Take for example here in the United States, we have homeless people, right? Homeless people will do things that is provocative. Not all of them, but some of them. Like they'll come up to you and they want your stuff, or they'll say things to you, or they'll be dressed in a very strange way, or they'll say very strange things, and normally they don't get arrested. I mean, sometimes they get arrested, but I mean, yeah, this is what they would do. And it was not acceptable to the Greeks, but that became their whole thing. All right? Well, anyway, they lived like a dog. Diogenes is the most famous of these. This is a painting of Diogenes. If you want to see that, you got to go to Rome. This little inset of a painting up here with him on the steps, that's Diogenes in Raphael's School of the Philosophers, and it basically it's a famous painting. It's bigger than the wall in here, and it's got all kinds of philosophers coming down steps and sitting on steps and stuff. Plato, Aristotle, so forth, and Diogenes. Okay, yeah. It's located in the Vatican Museum. Okay, so you have to go in the Vatican Museum, and of course, you go in the Vatican Museum. It's huge. But if you go in, you would go into a room, and it depends on if you're wandering around on your own, if you're on a tour or whatever. There's so much stuff there to see. You may not see it every time, but you would come into a room. The room would probably be about 6 times bigger in this room, and it has a big wall, and it's up on one wall over there. Okay, and it's just it's huge painting. If you've seen it, you'll remember it, right? And I don't have the whole thing here for you to see, but I showed a little excerpt of it when I talked about Plato and Aristotle. And now this is Diogenes. Okay. Well, Diogenes lives in Corinth. And this other little drawing of him, notice it's got him living in a jar. I found that painting or that drawing of him living in it because I would say he lived in a jar, and everybody look at me, how can somebody live in a jar? It's a very big jar. Okay? But his idea was you shouldn't own anything, really. You shouldn't own anything. And so he found this jar, and I probably put a little straw in it or something. He'd crawl in there and sleep. There he is sitting there. Okay? Now, here's another thing Diogenes would do. He'd go walking around with a lamp. In the daytime, the lamp's lit. What would he do? He'd walk up to you. Walk up to you, say, no. You see, Diogenes, what you do, I'm looking for an honest person. I can't find an honest person in the daytime with a lamp. Okay? You see, some people may not like Diogenes. Kind of rub you the wrong way. Search in the daytime for an honest man. He lived in a jar in Corinth. And like I said, they did private things in public. One of his sayings was, fear nothing, desire nothing, own nothing. That's a little quote for Diogenes. Does that make sense? There you go. Diogenes. By the way, it was said that Alexander the Great once met Diogenes. And when he met Diogenes, he said, Diogenes, of course he heard of him, kind of admired him, I guess, because he was famous. He said, Diogenes, I am Alexander from Macedonia. Is there anything I can do for you? I'm like, I'm a powerful guy. What do you need, buddy? What did Diogenes say? Well, you can move over. You're blocking the sun. That's what you do. You're blocking my sun. Get out of my way, in other words. That's Diogenes. All right. We got more to talk about. How about the Stoics? This is also from that painting. We were talking about that painting. Here it is right here. This is another close-up from Raphael's philosophers. This one's about Zeno. Zeno. Z-E-N-O. Zeno. You're looking for interesting names. Here's an interesting name for your son. Zeno. Zeno, 350 to 260. Zeno led the schools called the Stoics. How did the Stoics get their name? The Stoics got their name because they would always meet at the same place. Like some of you say, hey, I'll meet you at Portico, right? Then you might be called the Porticoians or something. portico. Well, I don't know what it would be. Something like that. These people would meet at the Stoa. When they meet at the Stoa, then they were called Stoics. Because the Stoa then was a big building that was a marketplace, and it had a painting on the wall. And so it was a lot of places, people would go to the center of town. This is where everything happened. You go to the shop, you go there for government, you go there for everything, go to just see people. And so, okay, we're going to meet at the painted porch. Stoa means porch. So these were the porchites, right? Or the porchers, or so, I don't know. Anyway, that's what the name means. Okay, Stoics. Well, what did Stoics believe? Stoics were pantheists. Really, their teachings are pretty much pantheistic. What do I mean by that? Well, remember we've talked about monotheism. We've talked about polytheism. This is pantheism. Monotheism, mono means one God. Theos is God in Greek. Mono is one. Poly, many. Theos, many gods. Pantheos means all or every. Everything is God. So God is in inanimate things like rocks, and it could be in trees and people, and everything is God. There are different emanations of God. It's sort of like an Eastern view, if you will. Say Hinduism, Eastern view of the divine, which is very different than the Western view. But they had it here in Greece. Stoics. Yes?
So like God not only created creation, but is creation?
Yes, and they would not have the idea of sort of a personal God that's a creator. But yes, so God is creation. Not that he created creation. There is creation, and that is God, and everything in it is God. And so all of us are God. Or it's very difficult for us to sort of comprehend it, because it's very different than what we're used to thinking, the way we're used to thinking about it. But this is the idea. It's sort of the idea that God is in everything, and everything is God. Yes? Yes. Yeah, it is. This part is. Zeno's living 350 to 260 BC. So, roughly 250 years before Christ is born. Now, one of the things that the Stoics taught is that since we are all sort of the same, the whole universe and us, are, somehow connected, right, through the divine, however you want to look at that, that the best thing we can do with our life is to live in harmony with the universe. Yeah, well, it has some commonality with the hippies. Yes, the hippies. So the idea here, though, there's almost the idea of fate. I don't think they use that term, but it's sort of like things are going to happen, and so you just got to go with it. Go with the flow. How's that? There's a phrase some people used to use. I don't have to use it anymore. Go with the flow. You use it? Okay, good. Well, I didn't know you're so out of date. No, I'm just kidding. Go with the flow. Go with the flow. So in other words, don't fight it. Things are going to happen. It's going to happen. See? That's just the way it is. You got to roll with the punches. There's another way. In other words, there are things you cannot control. Now, since you cannot control things, and things are going to happen to you, guess what that says about your emotions? You shouldn't have them. Why do you get so emotional? You get emotional, you get upset. Why? Because bad things happen to you. Or maybe you get really excited because good things happen to you. You shouldn't get emotional. Why? Because those things are going to happen anyway. And that's letting those things control you even more. So the one way you might be able to control a little piece of your universe is how you respond to what the universe does to you. I'm probably not doing it justice, but that's sort of the idea of Stoicism. So in other words, if you find out you won the lottery, you're screaming, you're running around, you're all happy. Find out, your relative dies, it's very sad. The Stoics would say, look, you should be very even all the time because these things happen. Bad things, what we might consider bad things, good things happen, but you should stay the same. That's your control. Your emotions, even. Yes?
You say that they say that people usually cannot control things, but also they believe that people are gods.
Yeah.
So isn't that kind of contrary to like those two ideas? Because if you're a god, I mean, can't you like have some type of
Yeah, I would say it's not that kind of a God. It's that everything is God. Everything is a part of the emanation of God. Everything is one, is the other way of thinking about it. We're all one because we're all the same because we're all God. But it's not a kind of controlling, it's not kind of a controlling God or creator God, a personal God. This is just sort of an idea of God with a small g, of course. Okay? Anyway, you avoid emotion. I can tell you somebody that this is like. I used to watch, well, I still like Star Trek. You ever watch what I call the Star Trek? You ever heard of the guy called the Spock? I call him the Spock. Never heard of Spock?
yeah.
He's shaking his head. Never heard of Spock. Man, I'll tell you, we got to educate you, man. You got to know about Spock. Anyway, Spock is a science officer on the Enterprise. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you got to go watch the show. And they've got the new movies too. They got the new Spock. They got the new Spock and they got the old Spock. The old Spock recently died. But anyway, Spock is a Vulcan. Actually, he's only half Vulcan. We can't get into all those details. But since he's half human and half Vulcan, he struggles with his emotions because Vulcans control their emotions. Like the Stoics. They're supposed to never smile, never laugh, never cry, I presume. You know, they just go very evenly. They just look at everything very logically. They say, I'm going to do this, do this, do this. Okay, that happened. All right, now I do this, this, this. Okay? So I sometimes tell people the Stoics are like Spock. They're Spock-like approach to life, right? Vulcan approach. Well, anyway, that may not help you at all. Especially if you don't have any idea who Spock is, that's not going to help you at all. I throw it out there as an illustration. Now, they had another, if you didn't like any of the rest of it, you're not going to like this either. They thought that, I'm not saying you're going to like any of these philosophies, I'm just throwing them out there because they were there. This is very popular in the Roman period, and they actually taught, some of the Stoics taught that your highest form of self-expression was suicide. Why? Because this would actually be a decision you could supposedly do yourself. You could throw a curveball to the universe by killing yourself. Again, I don't recommend any of this stuff. All right, let's move on. You think we're done? No, we're not done. We got at least one more. The Epicureans. Epicurean was founded by a guy named Epicurus. And here is the painting of Epicurus by Raphael at that School of Philosophy thing. You know, it's in Rome. If you look around on that painting, you'll find him there. If you know what you're looking for, and this is him. He lives, again, he was born in 341, he dies in 270. His Epicurean philosophy really grows in the Hellenistic period and becomes quite popular. It is quite popular with the Romans, trust me. Romans like this. A lot of Romans really like this. Why? Epicurus, instead of saying, you know, everybody is God and everything is sort of planned and stuff is going to happen to you, he says almost the opposite. Everything is by chance. Completely by chance. So guess what? If the universe is here by chance, and if you and I are here by chance, what does that mean? That means there is no meaning. That's what it means. There is no purpose. Why am I here? Dice rolled that way and I'm here. Deal with it. Why is the universe here? It just happened. Now, a lot of people in the modern world, this is what they think. It just happened. The universe is just here. There is no creator. There is no, design. There is no purpose. And by the way, when you go down that road, you end up with no purpose. You end up pretty much, most people end up in despair. And a lot of people end up just saying, what's the point of me being here? There is no point. So, sometimes they do things to end that, right? Or they live really depressed and sad life. Okay? Purpose. Now, fortunately, I don't believe this, and I hope you don't believe it. There is purpose, there is reason, there is meaning, but Epicureans said there is not. So if that's the case, if there are any gods, according to the Epicureans, they didn't deny, they weren't atheists. They said, well, there might be gods out there, but if there are gods out there, they don't care about us. They're not paying us any mind. In other words, you're on your own, buddy. You're on your own. You're going to make it? You're going to make it, maybe. But you know what? In the end, guess what? You're not going to make it. In other words, it's the idea of death. All of us die, right? That's what they would say. All of us die. And since all of us die, then in the end, what's left? They would say nothing. Yes?
So back then, was it just the thing to try to create a new philosophy for people to follow? Like, was that like you created one, you're like higher up in society?
Yeah. There was a lot of, the Greeks for a long time had a lot of concern with philosophy. I don't know where it come from. I'm not quite sure where it originated. But it starts way back in the 7th, 8th century BC. They want to know purpose of life. They want to know, all these things. And so they do sit around and think about it. And there was a school of philosophy in Athens, started by Plato, and that really got a lot of people thinking. So I think the Greeks were a very introspective people. Maybe I put it that way, or at least their culture was. And they just had some of them had different perspectives on things. Yeah, I don't know. That's probably not a very good answer, but that's about all I got. They did come up with these things. Now, so if, for example, there is no purpose to life, like we're just here randomly, right? It's like a game, you roll dice or whatever. Some of you play those other games and you got like dice with more than 4 sides, right? It's got all those, and then you start killing, you're playing your Dungeons and your Dragons or your other game, they have these multi-thing, I don't know, all the different games that there are of that, right? Now it's probably all computerized. Anyway, everything's just chance. So then what's the best thing that you can seek for? That in this life, you avoid pain. That's what Epicurus said. You know what? You're in this life. It's kind of like you're stuck here. You don't know why you're here. You can't really control it. But the best thing you can try to do then is day by day avoid pain. Now, and avoiding pain then, it means we should seek what is happiness, seek what is good, and avoid what is painful. That seeking of happiness in Greek is called hedone, which is the basis of our word in English, hedonistic. You heard that word? Somebody's hedonistic. It means they're seeking pleasure. So a lot of Epicurus' ideas then get transferred from just avoiding pain and sort of trying to be happy to actively seeking any kind of pleasure that somebody wants. Yes?
The Greeks' religion is
Polytheistic, yes.
So these philosophical statements are kind of like going against that, right? Because they're saying there's no God, right?
It's, well, for example, Epicurus said, there are the gods, but they don't care about us. So that's a little different than other people might say. But really, what you got to remember is that a lot of Greek and Roman religion is not very personal. The gods are powerful. The gods are concerned about themselves. The gods really only take notice of us when we annoy them or somehow we get their attention, and that doesn't always end well. Okay? If the gods take notice of you, it doesn't mean a good thing's going to happen to you that day. It may be a very bad thing might happen to you. In fact, they might decide, I don't know, like somebody who toys somebody else. Well, how about a cat and a mouse? You ever seen a cat catch a mouse, a live mouse, and then they play with it just for fun before they eat it? Well, like that. That's the way the gods are. They're far more powerful than us, and oftentimes they get annoyed with us, or we just amuse them. I'm kind of bored today. What's that guy down there doing? Let's give him a hard time. For fun. Just distraction. Yeah, go ahead.
So you'd be kind of like more like interpretations, more like maybe Pharisees and Sadducees for the Jewish culture, and maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose. I mean, most of these religions or philosophies are not really religions, but they do inform religion, and they're taking sometimes a radical view, say there are no gods, or they just dismiss the gods, or that the gods really don't care about us. Now, most, I suppose, if we say there was a good Roman religious person, would probably think that Jupiter is watching over us or something. But, it wasn't really a personal God. The idea of a personal deity, like say we have a personal God we have, say, in Christianity or Judaism, was not there. I mean, that wasn't part of their concept. Now, so they said you should have a lack of pain, hedone. And he also believed the soul was not immortal. That means when you're dead, you're dead. Okay? This is it. Now, there used to be a slogan. We got the Super Bowl. I think there's a football game this weekend, all right? Is there a football game? I think somebody's playing football Sunday.
It's Super Bowl.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay, Super Bowl this Sunday. I've heard about it. 51. Anyway, there used to be a commercial. These Super Bowls, everybody loves the commercials. Most of them are beer commercials, right? Well, not always. You could have chips, right? Maybe a few other things, but a lot of them are about beer. Now, there used to be a commercial for, I don't know what beer it was, but the slogan was this: you only go around once in life, so you should go around with gusto. That was their little slogan. And so basically, if you want, you only get one chance at life, so you better live it to its fullest and basically drink our beer. Okay? Our beer is going to make your life better. And I don't. It might have been Budweiser. I don't know, one of those things. It was, you only go. That was. You only go around once in life, so live it with gusto. Well, that's basically Epicurean stuff right up there. You only go around once, so you better enjoy it, man. Party it up. Basically, is what they're saying. Okay. So here I've got some Epicurean epitaphs I want to show you just for fun. How about this? What's an epitaph? Well, an epitaph is a Greek word that sort of sums up a Greek phrase. In Greek, it means something that's written on a tomb. And so here are some. For example, here's a statue of a guy. Epitaph, what does it say? General Fufnik, due to fear, he spent most of his time in the rear. See, he didn't go into battle. Somebody says, that's not a very complimentary epitaph. I died and all I got was this lousy epitaph. And then in the middle, I like this one. Here lies Lester Moore. 4 slugs from a 44. No less, no more. No. Guess you'll have to think about it. Think about it. Anyway. So epitaphs. Here's one lady's epitaph. On her tombstone, evidently this woman was famous for her fudge. And her name was Kay. So if you want to steal Kay's recipe, I guess Kay said, probably, here's what I'm guessing, I don't know. Probably Kay made this great fudge, and everybody kept asking her for the recipe, and you know how some of these ladies are, they don't want to give you the recipe. Said, oh no, this is my recipe, this is a family, this is a secret, whatever. And so finally, she decided, when I'm dead, okay, you can put it on my tombstone if you want. She might even said it like that, and so they did. So this sums up Kay's life. 2 squares of chocolate, 2 tablespoons of butter, so on, so on, so on. Wherever she goes, there's laughter. There's an epitaph, right? Sums up her life, a little phrase. So we know a couple things. I don't know Kay. I don't even know her last name. I don't know where this was. I just found it on the internet. But I do know Kay was a fun lady, and she loved to make fudge, and everybody was happy when she was around. Right? That's what I know about Kay from that. That's her epitaph. Let's look at some Epicurean ones. An epitaph is a short text honoring a deceased person. Epi comes from the Greek for over or at. Taphos is for the word like we have for tomb. So here's one. I was not. I was. I am not. I do not care. Now what is that saying? Remember what we just said about the Epicureans. They didn't think there was anything after this life. So when you're dead, you're dead. So what is he saying? I was not. In other words, there was a time I did not exist. Then there was a time I did exist. My life on earth. Then there was a time I died. And guess what? I don't care. That's just the way it is. Okay? I wasn't, I was, I'm not, I don't care. All right, there's one. Here's another one. Eat, drink, and come hither. Imagine walking around a cemetery and seeing a tombstone that says, eat, drink, and join me. See? You'll be dead pretty soon. So they're saying, you better eat it up, drink it up while you can, because you're going to be dead pretty soon like me, and you're going to be in this grave. This ought to remind you something. I think a guy by the name of Paul said once. At least he quoted it, right? It's in Corinthians. 1 Corinthians 15:32. Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. Now, of course, you got to look at Paul in context to see what he's saying there. Paul is quoting an Epicurean author. He's saying this is what people are saying, and of course, then Paul's saying you shouldn't say that, but you have to go read that for yourself. But so, a very similar statement in the New Testament that obviously must be Epicurean in its origin. So you can look that up. 1 Corinthians 15:32. Okay? And I'm giving you one last chance to write down that fudge recipe. And I expect to have some next week. We'll bring it in next Thursday. So I want to see an example of Kay's fudge. Sounds good. Yeah. Vanilla, sugar, chocolate. All right, somebody give it a shot. Hellenistic science. Let me say a few things about it. This is another part of their culture and creativity, or scientific things. The one guy I want to focus on is a guy named Archimedes. You ever heard of Archimedes? What? He made pie. Well, he had a principle, right? You ever heard of the Archimedes, 287 to 212, from Syracuse. Syracuse was a Greek city that's on the island of Sicily, just south of Italy. Okay, so this is a Greek colony. Back when we talked about how the Greeks expanded across the Mediterranean, Syracuse becomes one of the most powerful Greek cities, but it's actually technically not in Greece, it's on the island of Sicily. Okay, Syracuse. Now, this guy was very creative. You might call him sort of an engineer, a scientist. He had a lot of inventions. Reportedly, he made a mirror, a parabolic mirror. You know what parabolic means? Sort of curved. It's like a satellite dish. Everybody's seen something parabolic. You probably got a satellite dish somewhere. At least you've seen one. That's parabolic. So if you make a mirror like that, you can actually make the mirror in such a shape that it would focus the light. You could perhaps burn something. Well, reportedly, anyway, Archimedes made a big parabolic mirror. He would use it as a weapon to try to burn the sails of the ships that the enemies of Syracuse come into their harbor. He'd catch their sails on fire. Another thing he definitely developed was an Archimedean screw, it was called. What this basically was like a pump. They would put this down into some water. It's in a tube at an angle, and in it was like a corkscrew kind of thing. You would turn that, and it would actually turn the water up and pump, in a sense, lift the water out of whatever the tube was in. You know, a lake, river, sea. They could use it to irrigate fields and things like that, or pump water out of mines. He also emphasized the use of levers. Reportedly, he said, you give me a big enough lever and a place to put it, and I will move the world. You know, well, for example, you got a big rock or something heavy, you want to move it, you try to lift it, can't do it. You get yourself a little fulcrum, get yourself a long lever, like a pry bar, you can roll that baby out of there. Right? That's the principles of levers, and he worked a lot on that. Also, what we see here in our little cartoon, what's he saying? Eureka! You know the story of his saying Eureka? basically the king, the leader of Syracuse, had some gold, a big chunk of gold, by the way, a lot of gold, and he wanted a really nice crown. And there was this guy who reportedly was a great artist. They'd seen some of his work and said, wow, this guy makes beautiful things. So the king, the leader, gives the guy, the artist, a big chunk of gold. And then the guy makes a beautiful crown. I mean, it's beautiful. But then when the king gets it back, he starts to get worried. Maybe he sees this guy's buying a lot of stuff, or I don't know what he saw. But he starts to get worried. And what he thinks is that the guy didn't put all the gold in the crown. That maybe the guy put something else in the middle, like lead, and then covered it with gold. But the only way to find out would be to take a saw and saw down through the crown, which would mess it up. He doesn't want to mess up his beautiful crown, but he wants to find out if the guy cheated him. All right, that's it in a nutshell. And so he poses this question to Archimedes. How can I figure out if my crown is pure gold? You know, the gold I gave him this much gold. How can I find out? The crown now weighs the same amount as the gold I gave him, but is it gold all the way through? Reportedly, Archimedes was getting in his bathtub, or he's at the bath, which probably wasn't just a bathtub. And when he got in, you know what happens when you get in the bathtub? The water rises. So by the way, if you fill the bathtub up to the top and you get in, you're going to have a mess, right? It's going to go on the floor. It's going to go somewhere. It's not going to stay in the tub. So Archimedes, as he sat down in the tub and the water raised, he went, Eureka! Which in Greek means, I have found it. This is the idea of specific gravity. So Archimedes knew that if he weighed the crown, let's say it weighed a pound, I don't know, just say a pound. And he took a pound of gold, he submerged the crown in water, see how much water it displaced, and see how much the gold displaces, they better match. Now you'll have to read the story to see if they didn't match. I don't want to give you a spoiler alert. That's supposed to be him looking at the sun and so forth. Okay. Let me stop this.